The quiet hum of hospital machines filled the room, their rhythmic beeping blending with the soft murmur of distant voices in the hallway. Nurses moved in and out, tending to their patients, but in one particular room, something unusual was happening, something that left everyone baffled. A small cat, with fur the color of autumn leaves, sat perched at the foot of the hospital bed, her golden eyes never leaving the frail figure lying beneath the crisp white sheets. No one knew exactly how she had gotten inside, but there she was, curled up as if she belonged. At first, the hospital staff assumed she had wandered in by mistake, perhaps slipping through an open door. But when they tried to remove her, she refused to budge. Every attempt to carry her out was met with quiet resistance. She would wriggle free, dart back into the room, and leap onto the bed as if drawn by an invisible thread. It was clear she wasn't leaving. The patient, an elderly man named Henry, was unaware of the commotion. His breaths were shallow, his hands still. He had been in and out of consciousness for days, lost in dreams and memories only he could see. And yet, the cat stayed. She pressed her small body against his, her purrs a soft vibration against his fragile frame, as if she were trying to comfort him in a way that no human could. The nurses exchanged curious glances. Henry had no known visitors, no family who had come to see him. And yet, this cat had appeared as if summoned by something deeper than instinct. Word spread quickly through the hospital, and soon, doctors, staff, and even other patients were stopping by, drawn by the mysterious bond between the cat and the man. Some believed she was just a stray seeking warmth, while others whispered about the inexplicable connection between animals and those nearing the end of their journey. But no one could deny there was something special about this cat. Days passed, and still, she refused to leave. She remained by Henry's side, keeping watch as if she had an unspoken promise to keep. And then, one night, something happened that no one could have predicted. The hospital was never truly silent, but in the stillness of the night, the sounds became softer, the distant shuffle of footsteps, the low murmur of voices at the nurse's station, the occasional beep of a heart monitor. And amidst it all, the little cat remained, curled up at the foot of Henry's bed, her ears twitching at every small movement. No one knew where she had come from. The security team checked the hospital entrances, but there were no reports of a missing pet. The staff asked around, but no one claimed her. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere, guided by some unseen force. A young nurse named Emily had taken a particular interest in the cat. She wasn't supposed to let animals stay in patient rooms. It was against the hospital's policies, but every time she looked at the small creature resting beside Henry, she hesitated. There was something about the way the cat watched over him, as if she understood something no one else did. Emily sat by the bedside during her break, watching Henry's slow breathing. His condition had worsened over the past few days, and doctors weren't hopeful. He had lived a long life, but now, it seemed, time was slipping away. He had no visitors, no family listed in his records. It broke Emily's heart to think that he might leave this world alone. Yet, somehow, he wasn't alone. The cat had made sure of that. One evening, as the sun cast a golden glow through the window, Henry stirred. His eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in days, his fingers moved slightly against the bed sheets. Emily leaned in closer, hopeful that he was waking up. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Henry spoke. "Lily." Emily froze. It was Emily sighed, glancing at Henry's still face before shifting her gaze to the little cat. Something about the scene didn't make sense. The way the cat had found her way into the hospital, the way she refused to leave, it felt deliberate, almost as if she had come for him specifically. She reached out and ran her fingers gently over the cat's fur. The small creature leaned into her touch, purring softly, as if she understood the silent questions running through Emily's mind. As the days passed, more people began noticing the strange visitor. Some of the doctors shrugged it off, convinced the cat had simply chosen Henry's bed because it was warm and safe. But others weren't so sure. There were whispers among the night staff, quiet conversations about how animals could sense things humans couldn't, things beyond the physical world. Emily wasn't usually one to believe in superstitions, but the longer she watched the cat, the harder it was to dismiss the feeling that this was more than just coincidence. One afternoon, as she finished adjusting Henry's blankets, she noticed something that made her pause. Henry's frail fingers, which had remained motionless for days, twitched slightly. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make her heart skip a beat. She leaned in closer, watching carefully. Then, slowly, his fingers moved again, this time reaching toward the cat. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was the first sign of response he had shown in days. The cat, as if sensing the change, lifted her head and nuzzled gently against his hand. Tears pricked at Emily's eyes. Could it really be possible that the presence of this small creature was reaching him in a way no medicine could? She hurried to tell one of the senior doctors, but when she explained what had happened, he only offered a sympathetic smile. Sometimes patients react too. Emily wanted to believe the doctor, but something inside her told her this was different. The way Henry's fingers had moved, how the cat had responded, it didn't feel like a random reflex. It felt like connection. That night, Emily stayed longer than usual, watching over Henry and the mysterious little cat. The hospital lights flickered slightly as the rain outside tapped against the windows. The storm had rolled in suddenly, casting deep shadows across the room. The cat didn't seem disturbed by the thunder rumbling in the distance. Instead, she remained still, her golden eyes fixed on Henry's face, as if she were waiting for something. Then, something happened that sent a chill down Emily's spine. Henry's breathing, which had been shallow and weak for days, suddenly shifted. It wasn't stronger, but it changed, becoming rhythmic, as if he was responding to something unseen. His eyelids fluttered slightly, his fingers twitching again, but this time it wasn't just a small movement. His hand fully stretched out, shaking as if grasping for something. Emily stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "Henry," she whispered, barely breathing. For the first time in days, his lips parted slightly. A hoarse, broken sound escaped, almost like a whisper, but the words were too faint to understand. The cat lifted her head and let out a soft, almost mournful meow, pressing her small body closer to him. Emily's hands trembled. She had seen patients near the end before, but this was different. It felt like something unspoken was passing between them, something she wasn't meant to interrupt. She wasn't the only one who had noticed. A few other nurses had gathered outside the room, watching in silence. Word had spread quickly about the cat, about Henry, about the strange, undeniable connection between them. Even the doctors, who usually dismissed such things, had started to take notice. Then, without warning, Henry's eyes flickered open. Just for a second. Just long enough for Emily to see something behind them. Recognition, awareness. His lips moved again, but the words never came. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, his body relaxed. The room fell into a heavy silence. Emily's heart pounded. The cat didn't move. She stayed there, perfectly still, her golden eyes locked onto Henry's face, waiting. The nurses outside whispered in hushed voices, the tension in the air thick enough to hold. Something was about to happen. They could all feel it. Emily held her breath, her eyes darting between Henry and the cat. The room felt unnaturally still, as if the air itself was waiting for something. Henry's body remained motionless, his eyes shut once again, but there was something different about the way he lay there now. It was as if a weight had been lifted, as if he had found some sort of peace, yet he was still here. His breathing remained slow but steady. The cat didn't move from her spot. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on Henry, watching him with an intensity that sent shivers down Emily's spine. Then, out of nowhere, the cat let out a single, sharp meow, louder than before. It wasn't a cry of distress. It sounded almost expectant. At that exact moment, the lights in the hallway flickered. A few of the nurses gasped, exchanging uneasy glances. Emily's pulse quickened. It was probably just the storm outside affecting the power, she told herself. And yet, something about the timing felt too perfect. The cat stood up, stretching her small body, and then, slowly, she did something that made Emily's stomach tighten. She stepped off the bed, onto the floor, and walked straight to the door. She paused, glancing back at Henry one last time before slipping into the hallway. Emily hesitated for only a second before following her. The cat moved with purpose, weaving through the dimly lit corridor as if she knew exactly where she was going. Emily struggled to keep up, glancing back toward Henry's room, unsure whether she should leave, but something deep inside told her to keep going. The nurses in the hallway watched in confusion as Emily trailed the small creature. The cat led her past patient rooms, past the nurse's station, past the waiting area, until she stopped abruptly in front of a closed door. It was an old and used room, one Emily had never paid much attention to. Her heart pounded. She didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming urge to open the door. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the dim light barely reached the far corners. But as Emily stepped in, her eyes fell on something that made her breath hitch. There, on a small table in the corner, was a framed photograph. The glass was cracked, the edges yellowed with time, but the image inside was unmistakable. It was Henry, and in his arms, nestled against his chest, was the very same cat. Emily's hands shook as she picked up the frame. The date on the photo was from years ago. A realization hit her all at once. This cat hadn't just come to Henry by accident. She had been his. But how? Had she been waiting all this time? Watching over him? Somehow, knowing he would end up here? Emily barely had time to process the thought when a sudden sound echoed down the hallway. A voice, soft, weak, but unmistakably real. Where is she? Emily spun around, her heart pounding. The voice had come from Henry's room. He was awake. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the old photograph tightly, her mind racing. Henry had spoken, his first words in days. Without wasting another second, she turned and ran back down the hallway, her heart pounding in sync with the storm still raging outside. As she reached his room, she found nurses already gathered, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Henry was awake. His tired, sunken eyes blinked slowly, searching the room. His frail hand trembled as he tried to push himself up. Emily stepped forward, still clutching the photograph. "Henry," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "She's here." His gaze shifted to her, then down what she held. For a moment, he said nothing. Then a weak, trembling smile formed on his lips. "I knew she'd come," he whispered. Emily swallowed hard. "She never left you." The cat, as if waiting for her moment, padded silently back into the room. She leapt onto the bed with effortless grace and settled beside Henry, pressing her small body against him like she had done so many nights before. A tear slipped down Henry's cheek. His shaking fingers brushed gently over the cat's fur. "Maggie," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. Maggie. The cat had a name, and from the look on Henry's face, it wasn't just any name. It was one filled with love, with history, with something deeper than words could explain. "She was mine," Henry continued, his voice growing stronger. "For years. She was all I had after my wife passed." His eyes became distant, lost in old memories. "But one day she disappeared. I searched everywhere. She was gone." His voice broke slightly. "I thought I lost her forever." Emily tightened her grip on the photograph. "She found her way back to you," she said softly. Henry nodded, his fingers still tangled in Maggie's fur. His breathing, though still shallow, seemed steadier now, as if something inside him had shifted, something lighter, freer. The hospital staff exchanged quiet glances. They had all seen patients in Henry's condition before. They knew the signs. He didn't have much time left, but somehow it didn't feel sad. It felt right, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for her. Hours passed, and Henry never let go of Maggie. He spoke in hushed tones, telling Emily stories about the cat who had once been his closest companion, about the long nights they spent together, how she would always curl up beside him just like this. As the first rays of morning light filtered through the hospital window, something changed. Henry's breathing slowed. His grip on Maggie loosened. Emily reached for his hand, holding it gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "She's here." A peaceful stillness filled the room. Henry let out one last breath, a soft, content sigh. And then he was gone. The nurses lowered their heads, a quiet respect filling the air. Emily wiped her eyes, her heart heavy yet full at the same time. Maggie remained by his side. She didn't cry out, didn't move. She simply lay there, as if she understood, as if she had been waiting for him to find peace. And then, just as mysteriously as she had arrived, Maggie stood up, stretched, and leapt off the bed. She walked toward the door, pausing only once to glance back. One last look at the man she had never forgotten. Then, with the silent grace of a shadow, she disappeared into the hallway. Emily rushed after her, but by the time she reached the corridor, Maggie was gone. The nurses searched, security checked the cameras, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had simply vanished in a thin air. Days passed, and life in the hospital carried on. Henry's room was cleaned, his bed made, his name removed from the chart. But the story of Maggie spread. Some called it a miracle, others a mystery. But to Emily, it was something else entirely. It was love, a love that had endured beyond time, beyond separation, a love that had guided a lost soul home, just in time. And though Maggie was never seen again, Emily liked to believe she was still out there, watching over the one she loved, waiting for the next moment when she would be needed once more.